Things that I love about the culture in Chihuahua is just how like straightforward people are. Sometimes to the point of almost being rude, which is honestly very entertaining for me as a missionary because we're very careful with the words that we choose. You speak very formally. There's a formal and informal Spanish, and you always use the formal when you speak to people in Chihuahua or on your mission in general. Even children. So you'll talk to the children in this very formal voice that you would usually use for people that are that you very respect, or that are very respected in the community. And these children will look at you with these faces of like, why are you talking to me so formally? Why do you respect me so much? But it's just interesting to see the culture and how, people will tell you, don't talk to me like that. Talk to me like, informally. And you're just like, no, like this is what we do. We're missionaries. And then you get to explain to them, why you're there, what you're doing, and why you're doing it the way that you do it. And just as a culture, these people are very like curious. They're very open about things, and they are more than willing to hear you out. There's a lot of different religions in Mexico, in Chihuahua in particular, but the main religion is definitely Catholicism. And then there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses there as well that are also preaching, which is very interesting. A lot of times people confuse us with another religion, and so, it's very interesting to tell people, look, this is what we believe, this is, why we believe it, and people are very willing to open their homes to you, and I loved that. If we looked really hot in the middle of the summer in the desert, people would be like, hey, sisters, I've seen you around, do you need a glass of water? Or, hey, come into my home and we'll hear you out for a minute and just like rest. People are very loving, very giving, very understanding. And it was very nice to kind of be taken in by these people and basically become one of them, I guess. They started treating us like family. In certain neighborhoods, we had kind of a route that we would take a lot of the week because there's only one way to get out of our neighborhood. And, the people knew us so well. And we had crossed these streets so long that they just kind of knew who we were. They knew what we were about, and they accepted us as like family. So the Latin American culture, but specifically I feel like in Chihuahua in Mexico, it was very like, you're here, you're working hard, you're serving us, so, you're part of the family. And I definitely saw many instances where people just like opened their homes to us without reserve, opened their pantries to us and fed us food because maybe we looked like we were hungry, I don't know, but they were very, we tried to serve them, but they definitely served us back. So that's something I really love about the culture there, is that the people are so loving and so service-oriented. I arrived at my mission on January 6th, which is actually the day of the kings, is Dia de los Reyes, and that just basically means the kings that came to see Jesus after he was born, like in the Bible story. And they celebrate that day. They believe it was on January 6th. That's just when they celebrate it as a nation, and I happened to arrive on my mission that day. And I was very stunned that there's like this whole tradition behind it, and I had no idea what was going on until about a year later, and I was like, oh, that's what we did. But it's very cool. They have this bread that's called pan de rosca, and they have little it's like a little plastic baby that kind of represents like the baby Jesus, and they'll just bake it into the bread, or they'll put it into the bread after it's baked. And the tradition is that everybody will just kind of get a piece of cake and celebrate like when the kings finally made it to Jesus and got to give him their gifts and everything. And then as you're eating their cake and we're, talking about the holiday, whoever gets the piece that has the baby in it has to buy or make everybody tamales. So I got the baby my first day in my mission. I had no idea what it meant, and, nobody ever made me pay up with tamales, but could have had to have made a lot of people tamales, which is a very labor-intensive process, trust me. But it's just a very interesting tradition that they have. They celebrate a lot of different holidays there. There's Day of the Child, there's, of course, Mother's and Father's Day, but there's also Grandpa and Grandma's Day. Day of the Child is huge. There's, parades down, the main street in the capital city, and they actually have, a huge amphitheater there, and they, rent out the entire amphitheater for Disney characters to come, or superhero characters to come, or just this huge festival. So there's piñatas everywhere, there's just children dressed up in costume everywhere. It's almost kind of Halloweenish, but maybe mixed with New Year's and Christmas and just all these holidays just put together, and like it's just this huge celebration of children. And it's fascinating that, you know, you can hear this music playing from the amphitheater throughout the whole city, the whole day. And in the schools, they celebrate it as well, just like here in schools in the United States, we'll celebrate holidays with children in classroom settings. They also do that in Mexico, and the little kids will get, you know, presents from their family members and from their friends in their classes, kind of like we do like Valentine's, and we hand those out on Valentine's Day. The little kids will celebrate Day of the Child this way, and they'll get little presents, and they'll go home, and their parents will celebrate them. They'll have cake or whatever. They'll go to like parties. They'll go to the main party if they're, you know, if they want to celebrate with the whole city like that. So it's a really cool day that they celebrate. I was always very impressed by that because I feel like children are really important. So I thought it was very interesting that they honor people in different ways on different holidays throughout the year, as well as celebrating a lot of different very Catholic traditions throughout the year as well. You know, there's Lent, and there's, you know, lots of different traditions. There's, you know, during Easter, there's this whole procession in Mexico City where, you know, they hire somebody to portray the Savior, and a little bit gruesome, they have him, like, kind of act out the whole scene of the crucifixion and everything. And, you know, the Catholics in their tradition tend to focus on the crucifixion a lot, and just the hardships that the Savior went through, which is a good thing to remember. I think sometimes, you know, we can learn a lot from other faiths about just remembering that Christ did suffer for us and what he did for us. But it's good to remember and teach as a missionary as well that, like, he rose and he is risen and he lives. And it's not just about the fact that they killed him or that he let himself, you know, suffer for us, but it's also what that suffering brings us. And it's, you know, the promises that we have if we're faithful to his sacrifice for us. So it's definitely, you know, even with all the Catholic traditions, there is always a way to add on to them, to have a teaching moment, to make sure that people understand that your purpose as a missionary is to add on to their faith and not change it, because they already believe so much that we do. And there's just, you know, some traditions that are a little different or a little off that we don't, you know, believe in practicing. So definitely that's like a huge part of their culture, is all their festivities, all their celebrations. There's Day of the Dead in November, which is a huge thing as well. The funny thing about that is that Day of the Dead is 2 days of the year. So the first day is November 1st and the second day is November 2nd. And what happens is the Day of the Dead on November 1st is celebrated mostly for children who've passed away. And they set out altars of their favorite foods. Usually there's bread of the dead, which is pan de muerto. And usually there's like marigolds, and there's like bright colors. And there's a lot of symbolism involved in the altars that they either put up in their home or on the street or in the cemeteries themselves. And people will visit either the cemetery or will visit this altar, and they will, you know, leave the favorite food of the person that passed away in hopes that they can then on this day of the year, their spirit can come back and like kind of connect with them. And we do believe, you know, in the spirit world in the church. So it's a very interesting connection that these people feel with their passed on loved ones, that we as church members as well feel. So again, more teaching opportunities. And then the second day of the Dead is for the rest of people, so not just for children, which, you know, it's fascinating to me that there's always these special days for children. So the second day of the Dead is for the rest of, you know, adults, anybody else that they think might be able to come back and kind of visit them. What is interesting about that as well, though, is that I don't know if it's because of proximity to the United States, but in Chihuahua, they also celebrate Halloween, just like we do. Well, not just like we do, right? They dress up and they trick or treat, but instead of saying trick or treat at people's doors, and it's still on October 31st, but they will chant outside of people's like houses on the sidewalk basically, and they'll chant "Queremos Halloween," which means we want Halloween, and it's hilarious, honestly, and I love it, and it's adorable, and you know, lots of the little kids in the wards and in the areas, and just kids all over will do it. So they basically celebrate a version of our Halloween, and then they celebrate Day of the Dead. So that's definitely an instance where you can see that there's like a culture lapse, like in Chihuahua, because of its proximity to the U.S. And I'm sure it's similar on the other side of the border. I don't know much about Texas again, but you know, there's a lot of culture sharing, which is really cool. The history of the people in Chihuahua, like I was talking about earlier, it's very diverse. So there's, you know, a group of Germans that had come over at some point in history, I believe during either World War II or before, and they formed colonies. And then there's the Mormon colonies that happened, back before Mexico and the United States had their war. So back before it was really like American territory per se. And a lot of it was to avoid persecution. So a lot of the church members came down to the colonies in Chihuahua to avoid persecution from the United States government. In general, the history of Mexico is the people of Mexico are very proud of their heritage. The fact that the Spaniards came over, first of all with Christopher Columbus, but later on with Hernando Cortez, was very important for a lot of people. A lot of people in Mexico still will relate their genealogy back to how it connects to Spain, which is fascinating because when Cortez arrived and met the local people, the Taínos, the tribe that was here, and a lot of the other tribes, Aztecs, Mayans that were still around, but kind of in declination in their own societies, there's a lot of mixing going on between Spanish blood and, local native Mexican blood, but it wasn't considered yet Mexican. And that's kind of how the first Mexican people, I guess, came about. And it was a very interesting thing that people have as kind of a point in their family of how they can connect their genealogy back to Spain and things like that. So that's, it's a very diverse culture down there, which is very interesting. Some cultural do's and don'ts, I would definitely say, well, as missionaries, we as female missionaries, as sister missionaries, are not allowed to hug the males, in Mexico, but hugging is a big thing culturally. I was just stunned at how many people just hug each other, and that's just their common greeting. So in Mexico, when you greet somebody, what you do is if you're shaking their hand first, you'll shake their hand, and they'll pull you in, and the sister will give you a kiss on the right cheek, and you'll kiss her right cheek. So they'll just pull you in, you'll lean to the left, and you'll kind of just air kiss next to their cheek. I did not know that was a thing, obviously, until I got there. So, people would be pulling me in left and right and just be like, oh, you're new, and, they pull you in, or they just put their arms around, they give you a hug and a kiss on the cheek again, and, there's lots of different ways to go about it, but you kind of get into your rhythm of, as a missionary, hold your arm out straight for the men and don't let them pull you in, and then for the sisters or for the women that you might greet, because it's just a general thing, everybody does it, doesn't matter if you're a church member, whoever you are. You can either shake somebody's hand and pull them in, or you can just give them a hug and a quick kiss on the cheek sort of thing. So everybody's very, very open, very loving there. And so that's very reflected in their custom and their greeting. Just something that you have to get used to because it's very Latin American, very Mexican, to greet people personally like that, which honestly I really started to enjoy. It connected us very much with the people that we served, being able to greet them that way. Definitely don't be too awkward about it. Just try to roll with it and learn how to do it well, and because I think sometimes people get offended a little bit if, you stiff arm them, especially if they're sisters and they know that you are allowed to hug them and stuff like that. We did have to learn how to explain to, any men that we might have met why we weren't allowed to, have that contact with them, and kind of our purpose as missionaries and the boundaries that we were supposed to have as missionaries, and, most people understood. So it was an interesting, concept to Latin Americans if you weren't allowed to do, their customary greetings.